Thanks for joining us. Having finally secured international approval, the preliminary deal on Iran's nuclear program may now trigger a confrontation in Washington. Republicans are slamming it as a set of concessions, and they want to give Congress the ability to block it. President Obama saying, though, he won't allow that to happen. Here's Guyane Chichikan.
Well, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will move ahead with a vote on a legislation that would require a congressional approval of the deal with Iran. They're planning to vote on it on April 14th. How that's going to affect the ongoing negotiations on the deal is difficult to tell at the moment. Remember, the deal is not finalized. It is expected to be finalized at the end of June. The vote may cast a shadow on America's ability to hold its end of the bargain. The deal will envision the relief of all nuclear-related sanctions, provided Iran complies, of course. But many U.S. lawmakers oppose the idea. House Speaker John Boehner called the deal departure from Washington's initial goals. Even if the lawmakers vote to make sure that at the end Congress decides whether the U.S. complies with the deal or not, the president can still veto the legislation.
Well, the president has said that if the Corker legislation comes to his desk, he will veto it. And he also, though, said yesterday that we will be engaging with Congress on what that oversight role might look like. I don't have more details to share at this point.
So that veto threat stands?
Correct.
To overturn a veto, they would need 2/3 of the legislation. So that will probably not happen while President Obama is in office. But the deal, the potential deal, may be in danger if the next president doesn't like it.
Well, here's what the deal with Iran looks like at the moment. Iran agrees to only use its Natanz facility to enrich uranium for the next 10 years. Though for 15 years it will not enrich uranium beyond a certain level, enough for civilian purposes but not for weapons. It also signed up to that of international inspections. And that's all in exchange for the scrapping of European and American economic sanctions. Now, this plan of action, however, it does leave a number of issues, should we say, unresolved. One of the issues is that of redesigning the Arak and Fordo reactors for civilian purposes. Iran still wants to conduct centrifuge research at the Fordo center, something the West opposes. Also, Europe and the US want sanctions to snap back into place if Tehran fails to comply. Now, that's opposed by Russia, which insists that any reversal should be decided only by the UN Security Council. Analysts remain skeptical. At the end of the day, this deal will relieve any tensions with Tehran.
Washington's policies have adversely affected virtually every single Iranian living inside Iran. The nuclear issue, from where I sit, is just an excuse to undermine the Islamic Republic. And if it's really has very little to do with anything else, and I don't think this will be an end to the hostilities.
What it seems like what's been agreed is that the sanctions will be lifted after the International Atomic Energy Agency has verified that the Iranians have fulfilled every aspect of their side of the bargain. Of course, Obama has to sell the deal to his own Congress, so he's obviously going to try and spin it in the sense that they're not going to have to lift sanctions at all.
To some other headlines in brief now, there have been some major clashes in Brazil. Locals in one of Rio de Janeiro's largest complex of slums fought with police during a protest over the killing of a young boy. The protesters hurled rocks and bottles while officers responded with tear gas and stun grenades. A 10-year-old Eduardo Ferreira was shot dead during a police operation against suspected drug traffickers. The officers involved in the anti-gang operation have been suspended while an investigation is being held. At least 10 people killed in an explosion near a bus stop in Nigeria's northeast. 8 others are being treated for wounds sustained during the blast. The attack is being blamed on the Islamist group Boko Haram, which has launched suicide strikes against a number of bus stops and crowded markets in recent weeks. Japan could change its long-standing military doctrine of self-defense and take a stronger role in the Asia-Pacific. It's a move called for and supported by Washington. Currently, there is particular tension with China over disputed islands in the East China Sea. The Japanese Prime Minister has long been an advocate of expanding Tokyo's military capabilities and has already made some moves in that direction. In fact, Japan's maritime forces just received their biggest helicopter carrier since World War II, nearly 250 meters long with a massive crew. Tokyo and France have also signed a deal for military equipment and technology and will jointly develop methods of defense. And the 2015 military budget for Japan is the largest in 70 years. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has appealed to Parliament to change the pacifist constitution adopted after the Second World War. And political activist Rick Rossoff assesses what's behind Washington's support for Japan's sudden militarization.
Japanese prime ministers like Shinzo Abe and others regularly visit NATO headquarters in Brussels, and the General Secretary of NATO regularly visits Tokyo. So it's a very close relationship, and it's not simply, by way of analogy or metaphorically, an Asian NATO. This is the expansion of NATO into an international military bloc. I think Abe is a political opportunist, and he realizes he might be able to consolidate political control personally, of course, but on behalf of his political party, if he can stir up or exacerbate anti-Chinese sentiments, particularly fear of Chinese military aggression, and then using that as the excuse to further militarize the nation. But Japan, of course, does not need to remilitarize. This is a process that's been underway for at least a decade.
Millions of Christians all over the world are celebrating the Easter weekend. On Friday, thousands attended a ceremony led by Pope Francis at the Colosseum in Rome. But in other parts, European churches remain more or less empty, as Peter Oliver now investigates.
All the pomp and circumstance on the big stage, but in wider Europe, faith is waning. A third of people in France, a quarter in Germany, and almost half in Holland say that they have no affiliation with any religion. In the Netherlands, one church has taken on another congregation after the number of worshippers dropped to less than a handful. It's now a skate park.
I see it as a gift from God.
Of all the faiths, it's Christianity that's seen the biggest drop-off, with church attendance at an all-time low. As the birthplace of Protestantism, Germany has a multitude of places of worship, many in very rural sites.
One way to draw a congregation is to offer something different. That's what these churches in rural Germany have done. This one's set up for a year-round Christmas scene, with Mary, Joseph and the baby Jesus all carved out of tree trunks. And there's also 3 shepherds and their animals as well. There's also an Easter church where year-round visitors can walk in the footsteps of Christ's Passion and pull up a pew at the Last Supper.
With empty seats at services on the rise, this diocese looked to openness and left all the churches unlocked 24 hours a day to whoever needed them most.
Wir haben in allen Kirchen Gästebücher ausliegen.
All the churches have a guest book. I saw in there a suicide note, someone who had decided they were going to take their own life. Then a while later, in the same handwriting, that person was saying that being able to come to this place had convinced them otherwise. I think that says just why they should remain as places of prayer.
Other uses are being found for Europe's churches. In Italy, those unused are repurposed in every which way. From testifying before God, the origins of life, the collection plate, or a quite different take on communion. As attendance falls across Europe, it does seem in the future you're more likely to see a board slide rather than a baptism in some Christian churches. Peter Oliver, RT.
To the Golden State we go now for some heavy metal action in California. Yeah, the Robo Games kicking off after a year's hiatus. And the world's largest robotic competition features over 50 events, including the big heavyweight combat, where machines over 100 kilograms slug it out in that arena. But it's not just about these aggressive vacuum cleaners. Some cutting-edge humanoid robots also getting their fair share of attention. Well, thank you for sharing your Saturday with us here on RT International. Up next, Erin Aid exploring fears of what could be a massive employment crisis in America. The special program coming your way.